Hello, and welcome back to another chapter in the Sky Blue Studios tutorial series. In a response to a user request, let's look at how to receive and process swiping inputs from our player. As there is no simple engine standard way to do this, we must do a little bit of logic. Now, the first thing we have to do is set up our input. So I'll just go to Project Settings. Now what we're going to do is in our action mappings, we're going to add a new one. I'm just going to call it Finger 1. And we want to change its actual input to touch 1. So this is the first finger. Each touch number is the order in which those fingers are placed. So touch 1 is the first finger that someone uses. Okay, so now we have that set up. We'll just save so it applies it. And now we want to open our player. So the first thing I want to do is just for testing. Obviously this is for a phone because it's swiping inputs and gestures for touchscreen. But for testing in engine with a mouse, we need to add a little something at the end here. We need to add show cursor. Oops. Oh yes, and we have to get controller first. Get player controller and show cursor. And we'll just set it to true and make it come off begin play so that as soon as we play we can see the cursor. And we also want to add our variables. So the first variable we're going to add is something called start lock. So this is so that we can know where the player first puts their finger. So we're going to make it a vector 2D as it is the point in space on their screen. Compile and save that. And then we'll add another variable. This is going to be called prior lock. Lock stands for location. And this will be the location, the previous frame. You'll see why we need to use that later. Then we also want to add another variable called speed. Or, okay, we'll call it swipe speed. And we'll make this a float. And we'll make it 1 by default. And we also just need to create one more variable, threshold. So we'll just go swipe threshold. Then compile and save. So start lock and prior lock, those are set during runtime, so we don't need to change those. Swipe speed I've set to 1 because by default we'll just use 1. That can be used for later inputs. And for swipe threshold we want to make this 12. The threshold, you can make this whatever you want of course. This is the amount of pixels that the player can move their finger without triggering the swiping. So this can allow us to detect whether or not they're tapping and they just accidentally move their finger a little bit when they tap, or if they're actually swiping. So 12 works well. You can also use 16. But any lower than 12 really is a bit too small because obviously with fingers you don't have as much precision as with a mouse. So we'll leave this at 12. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is when I get our input finger 1. Oops. I'll just put this up here. It's important to know that with testing on a computer with a mouse, you don't need to add anything for using a mouse because as long as you have your settings set right, you, in the input, I'll just show you. You use mouse for touch here. As long as you have that true, then you can just the mouse will be simulated as touching for such like stuff like this. And then we want to get our controller again. Get player controller, and we want to get get touch state. So if we get this, we want touch 1 because that's our first finger. As we see finger 1, we chose touch 1, so we'll use touch 1. And then this gives us the coordinates of this touch on the screen, which is exactly what we need. So we're just going to make this into a vector 2D because it makes it just easy to work with what we're going to be doing with it. And so the first thing we need to do when we press down is we need to set start lock. And what we need to do is set this to our finger position, because when we press down, it will get the location of our finger and it will set that to our starting finger position. Then we want to set prior lock. We want to set this to start lock as well. This is so that when we're, for example, if you're controlling a camera with this, which we will show in a later tutorial, this is to make sure that we know exactly how much to move the camera, or whatever else you're doing with this. So now that we have this set up, we want to add on tick. Event tick. Whoops. And event tick, we want to add a gate. So we want to open the gate when the player presses down, and we want to close the gate when they let go. So this allows us to make sure we only do stuff when they've actually got their finger down and are swiping. So now what we need to do is we need to do a little bit of maths to figure out if the player is actually swiping at this particular point in time. So what we need to do is we need to get our current finger position. We need to subtract our starting location. So this gives us a vector representing the distance between our original finger position and our current finger position. And then we want to get length. So this just turns it from a vector into a single. This gives us the magnitude of the vector. So for example, if you have a vector that's a 2D vector that's 1 and 2, then vector 2D length will be the square root of 3, because you get a square root of 5, because you get 1 squared plus 2 squared, and then the square root of all of that gives you square root 5. So that's just how vector length works. And so now we want to see if this, we want to check if this is more than or equal to our threshold that we created before. And so if this is more than our threshold, then we want to be able to start doing our swiping stuff. So we'll create a branch up here and put that into our gate. And the first thing we want to do is, if it is true, then we want to set our start block to a huge number that is not possible on the screen. And this is just so this is so that when we move our finger back over start lock again, it doesn't pause for a second until you get another 12 pixels away from start lock. So it stops this little, you'll see like a little, the camera or whatever you're controlling will stop for a second, and then it'll continue once you swipe further away from start lock again. So we're just stopping that from happening. And what we've got here is we have, if we are swiping, then we can now do something with the swipe. So this means if it's true, we are now swiping, and we can do whatever we want here. So we're just going to print our current finger position multiplied by our swipe speed. This is just useful in case you're controlling a camera or anything. Basically, this just allows us to control exactly how much our swiping, how strong it is, sort of. I'll just convert that to a string automatically. And so now we're just going to print our current finger position anytime we're swiping. So obviously, in the later tutorial, we're going to go over how to actually do something with this. A bit more complex, but for right now, this is just testing. And the next thing we want to do is, right now we've got swiping, but we haven't got anything for tap. So to be able to make it so we can sense whether or not it's a tap or a swipe, instead of just sensing if it's a swipe, is we need to add in a sequence here. So what we're going to do is, first we want to stop the gate so swiping stops happening when we let go. And then we want to check whether or not our finger has moved more or not. We basically want to do this again, sort of. We want to see whether or not the person has actually moved their finger far enough to start a swipe. So we want to get our start lock and we want to get our prior lock, and we want to see if they equal each other. And this is just the tolerance, so we want it to be basically exact, so we'll just leave it like that. And if they do, then we'll print tap. So you can obviously add whatever you want here for tapping, but we're just going to print tap. And you may have noticed this actually will do nothing at the moment. It will always say this. We just need to, up here, before we print the string, we need to set prior lock. Oops. We want to put it after our print string. Set prior lock. So you want to set this prior lock. You want to put it to where our finger currently is, which is over here. You want to set this in your code after all of your swiping stuff. So when you're swiping, all of the logic you've got for what you're doing when you're swiping, you want to put this afterwards. Otherwise, this will not work properly. So now what we have is we have something that both senses a swipe over here and senses a tap right here as well. So now if we compile and save, and go back into our starter map and press play, you'll notice that we can't actually swipe around right now. Like it's working. There you go. So you have to click out. The camera's moving because the camera still moves with the mouse because we didn't disable that. But you have to click out first before it actually sense tapping. But you can see we're getting swiping. If I only move my cursor a little bit, you can see nothing happens. If I move it a little bit and let go, you'll see it says tap still. But if I move it enough, then you'll see it starts printing out our stuff, which means we're swiping. So yes, that concludes this tutorial. In a future tutorial, we will go over how to actually do something with this swiping, with this tapping. And we'll also go over pinch controls, which are useful for games where you need to zoom in or anything like that. But yes, that concludes this tutorial on UE4. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more. Bye.